Hello, it's me, famed rememberer of my YouTube login credentials. That's right, it's Newly Nova. Welcome to Best Books of 2025. Anybody still want a treat? Anybody still hungry? Anybody want a little bit more end of year content in like week 5 of the new year? Nah? It'll be fun. Yeah, if anybody mentions that it's February right now in the comments, it will subtract an additional 9 days off of my already shortening lifespan. But also, let's be honest, I kind of deserve it. So let that weigh on your conscience however it will. But anyways, before I actually get started with anything, I just have a quick word from the sponsor of today's video, which is Book of the Month. Book of the Month, if you are not familiar, which would be a miracle at this point if you're a regular viewer of this channel, is a subscription service that promises to give you the choice every single month between around 5 and 7 of the most exciting new releases. You pick a book, they put it in the box, and they send it to you. You don't like any of the books that are being offered that month? Don't worry about it. Book of the Month is cool like that. You could skip it, no questions asked, and they're not going to charge you until you pick out a book next time. Disaster scenario, you pick out a book, it's delivered, and it is just so bad that you honestly kind of find it to be an offensive use of your time. Once again, Book of the Month has got you, this time with their reader's guarantee. This month I got Good People, which feels a little bit to me like something that's written in this sort of style and tradition of a Celeste Ng, where it's a family drama, but also there's a central mystery inside of it. And in this book, you're examining this sort of perfect model immigrant family inside of America after some kind of horrible tragedy has happened that you're unpacking. And the whole book is told solely through witness testimonies, presumably at a trial from people who knew this family. So that's pretty neat. And then I also picked out How to Kill a Guy in 10 Dates, which is demonstrably less serious, I think. This looks like it's a campy kind of rom-com thriller where you're following this girl who goes to a speed dating event, except then somebody is killed and the murderer is still at large. But also I think it really seems like for some reason they can't just leave, they can't just run away. Yeah, that's what I'm rocking this month. If either of these sound remotely interesting to you and you'd like to join me, I would strongly recommend heading on over to the Book of the Month website and using the code ROMCOM to get not only your very first Book of the Month book in hardcover delivered to your door for only $9.99, but also a cool hat like the one that I'm wearing right now. Thank you so much again to Book of the Month for sponsoring this video. I really appreciate it. Let's get back to it. Hello, welcome back, welcome proper to the video. I'm glad you made it here safe given the arduous and often uncertain terrain of my ad. Today we are going to be covering the 7-ish books I feel have made the cuts as my most memorable titles from last year. I could theoretically have padded it and picked a few more to round it out at top 10, but in general, I like to only pick what I feel really deserves to be on a list like this, and this year that number is 7. There are 7 books I feel will stand the test of time with me. But before we crack into that list, some graphs for this year if you're curious. Some stats for the intrepid end-of-year content consumer. I ended up reading a total of 62 books this year, probably my weirdest reading year of my adulthood so far for several different reasons, none of which really matter at this point. But as you can see, I varied pretty tremendously when it came to the amount of books I read each month, and the reasons for that variance were also all over the place. I mean, some months were definitely a little bit more concerning than others. I definitely had some months where just the situation was pretty dire. September, I don't really know what happened in September. I don't think any of the memories from that entire 30-day period made it to long-term storage inside of my brain. That was a level of dissociated from not only books, but also just the general world around me that I think would qualify as a concern to science. But then we skip forward a couple of months, we get to November, and you might think that it was the same because the output was the same, but no. That month, I was just playing Clair Obscur, and that was it. That was like all I did with all of my spare time. I just played through the entire game, and also all of the post-game content. On Expert. No big deal. Clair Obscur Expedition 33 would be on this list, by the way, if it were a book, which it's not, but I feel like it's worth mentioning that it would. It would probably be in first or second place. So yeah, take that as you will. Take that as is relevant to you. I was even driven to read fan fiction about the game afterwards, and it's not even really a mature enough fandom in terms of time since release to have generated that good of fan fiction, but yeah, I mean, that's where my November went. Anyways, point being with all of that is we survived various storms together, okay? We buoyed out some weaker reading months with some stronger output elsewhere. So yeah, I feel like it turned out okay. I got through 62 books total, which was a little bit below my reading goal for last year, which I always tend to make just whatever I read the previous year +1, generic upward mobility, rah. Yeah, I didn't quite make 79, but next year, that means we're only shooting for 63. So I feel like we're on the up. You can also kind of see my strange experience this year as it's represented in my genre chart, which looking at this and comparing it to my previous year does make me a little bit sad in retrospect because I do actually really enjoy good lit fic, good thrillers, memoirs especially, but they're not really my comfortable default place quite in the same way that fantasy was this year whenever things are really emotionally turbulent. Overall rating spread side was also similar to last year, but on average, I would say I was actually slightly less bitter, which is cool. Few books overall, I would say, that truly hurt me, which was nice. Books by men as a general category, despite a small bump in 2024, has since spiraled back down to a new all-time low. Sorry, men. I don't know what happened. I will say that I did read House of Leaves this year, which, if this was a just system, I think would have counted with the weight of like 6 or 7 books written by men. But unfortunately, I just counted it as one, so here we are. This just means that next year we have even more room to grow. Okay, I feel like we could get up to like 15% again if the men are lucky. But yeah, I mean, I thought that was pretty funny. I like comparing that stat year by year and just seeing what happens. But anyways, okay, jokes aside, moving away from all of the direct comparisons and stats, overall, how do I feel? Am I okay? Am I disappointed by my reading this year just because I didn't make my goal? Here's the thing. Classic disclaimer that I feel like I and every other book creator that exists and also cares whether their audience lives or dies is always making when they do videos like this. 62 books is probably a lot of books for people who are not reading as either their primary hobby or as a part of their occupation. You definitely can read this much and more if you really know life it. I mean, I would know. I read like twice this many books when I was in college full time. But most people do this really crazy thing where they value things like balance and time with loved ones inside of their lives. The truth is, like, any amount of reading that you are doing, that's good, okay? This isn't school. This isn't a test. It's not work. There's no KPM that you have to meet in your own personal life with hobbies that you are doing because you enjoy them. That's why my feelings on what I've read should not impact your feelings on what you've read, okay? We're different people with different lives. But here's the thing. I'm also trying to do this really cool, fresh, novel technique where I practice what I preach, even if it's about me, which is really hard, it turns out, when I'm used to thinking that all of the neat motivational stuff is true, but only for everybody else on the planet. Only for all of them, not me though. That's what I normally do. That's how I normally kind of self-flagellate over and over again. But being really brave in 2026, and honestly, I'm fine with it. I'm fine with how much I read. I had a lot of shit going on this year, especially around like the middle and end of the year. That's fine, okay? Life comes at you in tides. You're not always going to have an equivalent amount of time and mental space to dedicate towards the thing that you love in all of the different seasons of existence. And I didn't really have it this year. And at the end of the day, I feel like what matters for me and for anybody else who didn't meet their reading goals, but also in a softer sense, anybody else who didn't meet any kind of goal that they set for themselves last year. I enjoyed the time I spent doing this thing that I love. And I found a lot of books that I will remember and carry forward with me into the future, into greener pastures. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it. And I'm proud of myself for what I was able to read this year. And you should also be proud of yourself, whatever your number might look like. But anyways, all of the sappy, mushy, like feelings on the year aside, this is a video about some bangers that I read that I'm really excited to talk to you guys about. This video is also no spoilers, hopefully for obvious reasons. I mean, I just feel like spoiling books in a video like this, where I clearly want you to read the books, is stupid. It's like godless, evil, probably a sin of some kind in several major world religions. Worst books video, which will eventually exist, that one will have spoilers, but not this one. These are actually books I think that you should read, okay? I'm only going to be giving you what I would deem an acceptable amount of information for you to still have the full experience of enjoying these books. But yeah, let's get into it. In 7th place, we have all the way back from the beginning of this year for me. This is First Time Caller by B.K. Borison, one of only 2 pure romances that are on the list this year. And this book, I felt when I read it, is about as close as you can possibly get to a sort of modernized Nora Ephron rom-com. Obviously, it's a book and not a movie, but I feel like it has the exact right blend of humor and also heart inside of it, where reading it is fun. It's a fun time. The jokes don't try too hard, but they actually are pretty funny. And you're getting just a couple of sprinkles of angst and of emotional conflict, but it's never really that serious. For the most part, you're really just having fun. It's entertaining. But what does exist in terms of inner emotional turmoil allows for these characters to also live and breathe on the page, because I feel like one thing the book does take pretty seriously is humanizing its cast. In this book, you are following a woman named Lucy, who is a single mom of a spunky young kid named Maya. I feel like Maya is somewhere in the range of 12. And overall, the two of them, I would say, are pretty happy, but Maya still ends up one night calling into this radio station, looking for advice for her mother's, frankly, pretty dead love life. And Lucy ends up catching Maya on the phone and taking it away from her. And the conversation that ensues on this line with the host of this radio station, Aiden, ends up going so turbo viral in comparison to anything else that this station has really ever been doing, that they reach out to her and they offer to bring her on as a co-host for this show temporarily to kind of take her through dating misadventures, trying to set her up with somebody in the community. Also, in a pretty transparent bid to save this dying radio station. Because again, pretty irrelevant. You could say that they're not doing that well. And yeah, she accepts. Cue shenanigans. I'm sure that you can kind of imagine how silly goofy it might be for a girl and a boy to co-host a show together that is ostensibly about finding the girl love with somebody else, except then actually maybe they have really cheeky banter. Maybe they get along better than anybody could have possibly imagined, and maybe they kind of understand each other in a way that they thought was impossible. I just found this book to be such a breath of fresh air. I feel like every once in a while I read a romance novel that reminds me why I love romance, especially given the fact that I tend to be drawn to reading a lot of vogue popular romance novels that are not really 100% to my tastes. I go through dry spells with romance sometimes, and I slowly start to look in the mirror and wonder what I've done to end up in this situation. But then a book like this comes along and just reminds me why it's all worth it. And when I read this book, I hadn't read a 5-star romance novel in at least a year. I mean, I don't think I gave any romance I read in 2024 5 stars, even though there were a couple that I liked. But just nothing had really hit for me in the way that this hit for me when I read it. It was delightful. The supporting cast in this book, like in any truly good romance novel in my opinion, is also worth a specific mention. One thing specifically I remember really enjoying about this is that Lucy has this really positive co-parenting relationship with her ex, with the father of her child. The two of them were lifetime best friends before everything happened, and they've maintained this really like kind of subversive positive relationship as they're raising this kid, her and then her best friend and his husband, in houses that are right next door to each other. And I feel like those relationships take what I think a lot of authors would squeeze into a really sad, tragic backstory of like a single mom who works 2 jobs, you know what I mean? And Lucy obviously is still hardworking, of course, and her life is complicated. She still has things going on she needs to work out, but I really appreciate how from the start of this book, she exists already in this sort of found family. I just feel like it made her character and her relationships and her story a lot more dynamic. And Aiden, likewise, the male love interest, is somebody who is a little bit more controversial, I know, in reviews of this book, but personally, I liked him. I thought he was a great character. I really appreciated that B.K. Borson was able to write a male main character that was a little bit avoidant without making him evil. That's harder than you probably think, but here, the kind of impossible was done. I feel like he really worked for me. I loved them as a couple. I found them very easy to root for, and it was also easy for me to see what they saw in each other as they're starting to form through this book, these really big, fat, obvious crushes on the other person. Just a really excellent standard rom-com that kind of reminds you of the ancient texts it feels we have started to lose, in modern romance film especially. Side note, I would love to see this book adapted. I think it would be really great, but that's kind of beside the point. Next up, in 6th place, we have the other romance novel from this year. Weirdly, I think the hardest decision for me to make with this list was deciding between the two of these, which one I felt made more of an impact on me. But I ended up giving the edge to We Could Be So Good by Cat Sebastian. This is technically a historical romance, but not in the way that is probably most familiar to you, because instead of Regency era England, we find ourselves in 1950s Brooklyn, and we are hanging out inside of a newsroom. That's where the story begins. It's just 2 guys in a newsroom. What if their hands touched? Then what? This book follows 2 guys named Nick and Andy. Nick is an upstart young reporter who is like hyper competent, really, really passionate about his work and about all of the investigative journalism, especially that he's doing in this book. And then Andy, on the other hand, is the son of the owner of this newspaper. And I would say mostly against his will, Andy is getting groomed by his dad to take over the newspaper one day. Even though Andy cannot be trusted to really know what the fuck is going on around him, really ever. But despite that, Andy is also eminently likable to everybody around him in the station as soon as he starts. And he and Nick end up becoming really close friends just because Nick is so competent that he's able to assist Andy with figuring things out in his new position that his dad put him in. And yeah, I mean, you're kind of following them through a decently long time of them staying close as well inside of this book. I would consider this to be, especially relative to most modern romance novels, pretty slow burn. This is friends to lovers to oops, we're roommates, oops, now we are relying on each other as singular beacons of hope inside of this broken world, oops, through thick and thin, through the deepest emotional turmoil and the highest of highs, the one person I hope to have by my side is you. Like, there's a lot of that going on before it becomes remotely obvious to either of them that this could be romantic. And honestly, that is my preferred tone for a romance novel. I appreciate a good yearn. I actually need it in order to survive. And this book was restorative. The main reason why this edged out first time caller for me on this list is just because of how soft and tender I think the relationship is. I feel like when I read this, it was exactly the kind of love story that that I wanted. And even though it doesn't shy away from the obvious tension of being queer in the 50s in America, famously not a great time-place combination, that tension is important, but it is far from being the centerpiece of this novel. And ultimately, even though it does have intelligent things to say and observations to make about this particular time in history, it's allowed to just be, again, this really soft and tender romance. I remember saying something like this in my review back when I read this over the summer, but I'm sure that I could come up with some bullshit inside of this book that was not perfect. If you really wanted me to pick through this book with the fine-toothed comb of jaded cynicism, that's something I'm completely capable of doing, but I think the most impressive thing that this book did was making me not even a little bit want to do that. This was perfect to me. It was exactly what I needed it to be. And if you want something that is soft and beautiful, and also just a really delightful portrait of finding not just love, but also friendship and community inside of life, this book is definitely for you, just like it was definitely for me. Next up, I have the first entry in this list that is a stand-in for a full experience for more than one book, and that is the Jade City trilogy, otherwise known as the Greenbone Saga. I read all three of these books this year with a little bit of a gap between the first two and the last one, but I got there. And even though each of these books, I think, came with its own set of strengths and weaknesses, and even though I never actually gave any of them individually 5 stars, this series to me was something that was so obviously stronger than the sum of its parts that it would feel incorrect not to include it here inside of this list. I look back overall on the reading experience and on the arc of the trilogy as a whole very, very fondly. This is one of a couple of books or sets of books on this list that has aged, I think, a lot better in my memory even than when I read it. Not to say that I didn't like it when I read it, because I absolutely did. I loved all 3 of these books. But those small things that I didn't like as much when I was reading this series just made so much less of an impression on me than all of my favorite bits that I feel like it's just aged and will continue to age so well. Yeah. Anyways, if you watch any fantasy content on YouTube or TikTok, or even if you read like the fantasy book Reddit, God forbid I invoke Reddit in this video. If you have been anywhere on the fantasy side of book internet, you're probably like, oh boy, another person glazing the Greenbone Saga. Whoa, how novel, how unique. Oh boy, the 20 millionth person telling me it's a must read. Oh wow, that'll finally do it. Like, yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm the 20 millionth person recommending this series. And guess what? It's fucking good, dude. I don't know what to tell you. The people are right. The streets have been saying it, are saying it, will say it, and they are 100% correct. And if you are a big epic fantasy fan and you still haven't picked this up yet, despite the chorus of voices around you, yeah, let me be the 20 millionth person to tell you to change your mind, okay? This is really, really good. But Jade City, the premise, if you don't know, if this is all fresh to you, if you have not been in all of these places where people talk about this, like the Second Coming of Christ, Jade City is a Godfather-esque martial arts, high fantasy political drama, I would say, that follows this family that controls, kind of in a roundabout way, a large portion of the government and the resources of this tiny island country called Kekon. And through the series and through its many, many pages, you're mostly following this one generation of 4 siblings that are all coming of age and coming to adulthood during this particularly turbulent period of history, where the Call family is facing this myriad of different threats, both domestically from the other main shadow government crime family called the Mountain Clan, as well as internationally, because other countries want the resources that Kekon controls. They want this substance that is called jade that can give you all of these powers that help enhance your physical abilities and basically allow you to do really, really cool martial arts. That's mostly what jade does, among other things. And that is just about the most reductive description of the plot of this series to ever exist. But it's kind of complicated to synopsize just because of how expansive the series is, both in terms of plot, but also in terms of characters. I mean, it feels like you're getting to know not only these 4 people, the 4 calls I already brought up, but really the entire family, basically everybody who is relevant to those 4 kids' lives. You're getting to know what feel like multiple full communities of people during this series who all have their own ambitions and secrets and machinations they're trying to put into play inside of this world. So if you like a scheme, if you like some political intrigue, you're going to have a lot to chew on inside of these books. But even if you don't, even if that is not super compelling to you, even if that's a little bit intimidating to you, where I actually think this series is most successful is not really at all as a story of political intrigue, but rather as a family drama, as a family saga. I'm sure that plenty of people get really, really into the politics of this series, and there were definitely moments for me where I was really invested in everything that was going on, but ultimately, to me, I feel like the political intrigue was weaker comparatively as a part of this series, especially as we got closer to the end. I didn't always love the convenience of how a few different things wrapped up inside of the series. It just became so massive that, I mean, how else would you really wrap them up, right? But the thing is, not only is that not everybody's opinion, that's just my opinion, but also it doesn't even really matter at the end of the day, because the majority of what is happening inside of the politics of this world, all of the different things that these characters are dealing with, is just this really complicated set dressing for what instead ends up being this really moving picture of what family can mean to people. This rainbow of different ways that you can astound and disappoint and impress and betray the people that you love. What secrets can do to couples, to parents, to children. How we move forward through things like grief, like heartbreak, right? All of these much more nebulous character relationship arcs are really the bread and butter of this series in a way that I don't think I've ever seen done quite this well inside of fantasy before. And the results of all of that, what you're actually getting inside of this 3-book series is this collection of 3-book-long character arcs that just plant themselves so deep in the marrow of your bones, in like the dirt of your soul. Love them or hate them, the calls go through so much inside of these books that they become a part of you. And the last like 15% or so of this book is one of the most meaningful sections of a story that I've read in a very long time. Of course, in order to get there, you have to read through the previous 1,500 pages or whatever of buy-in. But once you buy in, once you have space in your heart and in your schedule to pick it up and to give it the fair shake that it deserves, you are about to go on just such a fantastic ride. Also worth mentioning with that I mean, it's not just like all for the end of book 3. There are definitely other action-packed, exciting moments that you can find throughout the whole series, because all 3 of these books constantly are just doing this thing where you have about 150 pages or so of pretty intense conversations and plotting and character building, followed by the most ridiculous, freaked out action scene you've ever seen. And it changes everything. They all change everything. Every single action scene, I feel like, in this series just completely rocks the world to its foundations. So take that as you will. But yeah, I mean, that's the kind of drip, flood, pitter-patter pacing that you're going to get with this series. It's super worthwhile. There are characters in these books I feel like will stick with me for an exceptionally long time. Would recommend, again, if you're an epic fantasy fan who somehow has not picked this one up, dude, what are you doing? Next up, in 4th place, every single year, without fail, there always ends up being a book where I don't give it 5 stars, and then I get to making this video, I get to best books of 2025, and I look back on that review, and I'm like, I don't know what I was smoking. I don't know why this didn't get 5 stars. I don't know how we ended up here, but whatever, here we are. And this year, I actually do remember why I didn't give The Buffalo Hunter Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones 5 stars. I've just chosen to no longer care, because similar to Jade City, what few problems I did have with the pacing, and specifically also with the resolution of this book, those problems are dwarfed in my memory by how moving and haunting and fantastic of a reading experience this was. The Buffalo Hunter Hunter is sort of a story inside of a story inside of a story that follows, at first, this girl named Etsy, who is sent a journal that is discovered inside of the walls of a church that's being busted down. And the reason that she sent it is because it was written by this guy who turns out to have been her late great-great-grandfather. I think that's enough greats. His name, she learns, was Arthur, and he was a pastor in the early 1900s. And the majority of this book is her transcribing directly to you, as if you're reading it, the journal of this late great-great-grandfather. Inside of this journal, you have both these typical entries that paint the picture of Arthur as this guy who is, I mean, yeah, technically a pastor, but also he is this narcissistic, gluttonous piece of shit who just takes advantage of his position to basically get free things from people who contribute to the church at fear of death or, you know, getting doomed to hell or whatever, or also just trying to be a good person. He takes advantage of that too. And also he clearly thinks he's better than everybody because he lives inside of this small town, but he was educated at like Harvard or Yale or something. But yeah, anyways, about half of it is his journal from his perspective, but then the other half is him transcribing the oral confession of this Blackfoot guy, this indigenous man who just shows up one day after church and asks Arthur if he will hear his confession of his various sins that he'll get to eventually, he swears. This guy goes by Good Stab, and Good Stab, it turns out, is a vampire. And he has a lot of fucked up experiences related to both before he became a vampire, him becoming a vampire, everything that transpires after he becomes a vampire. This is a vampire story, and it becomes immediately clear to Arthur as he's listening that Good Stab knows something about Arthur, that Arthur doesn't even want you, the reader of his journal, to really know. And the more of this book that you read, the more quickly you start just hurtling towards this why are we here moment for the both of them. Necessary disclaimer with this book is, especially if you don't cut your teeth on reading historical or literary fiction with any kind of regularity, the start of this book is dense. It's slow. I think that until about 5 or 10 pages into the first portion of Goodstab's monologue, that for me was really where I started actually getting hooked on the story and what was happening. But I think that especially because of the way that Arthur's sections are written, I mean, I think accurately as an asshole early 1900s pseudo-intellectual pastor who is writing like all of those things would imply that he would write, I definitely started to really enjoy his sections as the book went on and as we learned more about what was going on. But since the beginning can be so tough, I would consider this book to have a slightly higher barrier to entry than a lot of what I read in this channel, even a lot of the lit fic that I read. But if this kind of story interests you at all, I really do think it's worth it. I mean, it's my 4th favorite book of the year for a reason. I just feel like it's important to know what you're getting yourself into because, I mean, if you get to the end of Goodstab's first story section and you're still not feeling it, maybe this book just isn't for you, but you have to at least get there. Like, you cannot put it down before you start hearing this guy's story. But back on the topic of knowing what you're getting yourself into, I also think it's worth mentioning that even after you're able to fully immerse yourself in the prose of the story, the book does not stop being challenging in a lot of other ways. One of the most impressive things that this book is able to do is its ability to just seamlessly blend together real-world American indigenous history, especially really awful, violent history that is often forgotten and not really covered inside of American education system. It's able to take these real atrocities, these real historical horrors, and blend them with the mythology that Stephen Graham Jones creates inside of this book, with the vampire of it all, if you will. This is a book that will make you feel uncomfortable and haunted and just deeply, deeply sad for the majority of your reading experience, but also in a way that is honest and extremely moving, kind of because of the story locking you in this place that's kind of off kilter with all of the insane shit that's happening. You're thinking not only about all of the things inside of this book that scare you, but also all of the things inside of this book that scare you and were true, that scare you and actually happened and actually are a part of an often forgotten history. This is the kind of book I think would benefit a lot from having literally anybody else inside of your life who either is reading it with you or has already read it that you can discuss it with. A lot of what happens is kind of abstract and symbolic, never in a way that impacts your ability to understand what's happening in the story for the most part, but always in a way that provides, I think, a lot more depth once you take some time to think about it. And just in general, the book is, in a sense, I think pretty open-ended in terms of what you're supposed to get from it thematically, and just reading it with anybody in your life who you can talk to about it, I think could help a lot. But I love this. I loved it a lot. I love it even more with the time I feel like I've given it to breathe. And even the ending, which I had mixed feelings about when I read it, in retrospect, I find I've actually warmed to it quite a bit because of the risks that it took. I like endings that give you something to talk about. So yeah, if you're open to horror specifically that is not really genre fiction, but is more so kind of this fusion of lit fic and historical fiction with these extremely intense, violent scenes of horror. Lots of violence. There's lots of blood and body horror too inside of this book, so warning for that for anybody who is not a fan. But if you're into any of those kinds of things and you have room in your brain for it, this is fantastic. It's not going to work for everybody, but I think for the people that it does work for, it's going to be one of your favorite books that you've read in a very, very long time. Next up after that, we have kind of another joint listing, kind of not. I don't know if the lighting is different, but if it is, I had to do something real quick, but now I'm back. Anyways, I kind of got to the point this year where I really craved familiarity and comfort inside of media. And what this meant for me in practice was that I got 100% of the Terraria achievements on Steam. I listened to an absurd amount of 2015 era popular Broadway musical soundtracks. I rewatched a bunch of my old favorite YouTube video essays, and I was multiple times like 2 clicks away from re-downloading MapleStory, which just would have done nothing at all to improve my quality of life. So I'm glad we didn't get to that point. But Murderbot was there to pick me up, not only out of my fall reading slump, but also generally out of, to keep things business, my Q3 mental health valley. And I imagine that this is a book, or I mean, I guess rather like a series, I will talk about a little bit more in depth whenever I get around to doing my wrap up for what I squeezed in reading this winter. You know, just whenever that feels right to put out into the world, because I only officially reviewed the first one so far on my channel, but I did end up reading all 3 of these before the end of the year. And all 4 of them, this entire set I found to be pretty life-affirming in a way that I think I desperately needed. But what is Murderbot? Great question. Murderbot is a sentient robot that has managed to break the chains that bind it to the control of the company that owns it. Occupationally, it's supposed to be this sort of combat sentry guard thing that is contracted out by its owner to help a bunch of various projects throughout this science fiction universe. So it is supposed to be beholden to the company owners, right? So that way it can accomplish that purpose, but it's found a way to not do that, which is great, except it realizes pretty quickly that there's no real clear path out of the company's control, because if the company ever catches a whiff that it's no longer forced to respond to its governor module, they'll just destroy it. They'll scrap Murderbot for parts. parts, basically. So instead of doing anything bad, or really just anything at all to rock the boat, it's kind of just hanging out on its missions, doing what it's supposed to be doing, and then whenever it can, it watches this like absurd number of soap operas. And that's how it's been living for some time, until at the beginning of this novella, it's helping out this group of scientists who are surveying a planet. Unlike the majority of the clients that Murderbot is forced to work with, who kind of just fucking suck and are super mean to it all of the time, these clients it actually kind of likes because they're nice. So when these scientists are suddenly thrown into mortal danger and it becomes crystal clear that something on this planet wants them dead, Murderbot kind of sighs dramatically and is like, fuck man, I don't really want to deal with this. I don't really want to do this work, but also, I mean, I don't really want these mostly nice people to die, so guess I have to, and it steps in to try to protect them. And thus begins Murderbot's adventures. The other 3 novellas are pretty similar in structure to this one. It's also Murderbot doing these like unwitting rescue missions that kind of fall into its lap, but they definitely have a general arc to them. Like there are things that Murderbot is trying to do throughout this entire series that you kind of see elaborated upon and explored. And that arc does end, I think, in the last book, but in a way that makes me feel pretty interested in how the series will continue to evolve, because I think that there are like 2 more novellas I haven't read and then 1 full-length book to my knowledge. So that'll be interesting. But yeah, why do I love this so much? First of all, in a broader sense that isn't personal to me in my particular emotional state, I feel like stories about robots in general always are going to have something to say about things like forced labor and control and cruelty. And Murderbot exists in conversation with all of those kind of typical themes of the subgenre, but it engages with them in a way that I really, really liked. Throughout all of the novellas, you get to see and meet a lot of different robots who all have varying amounts of intelligence, but also autonomy and especially drive and purpose inside of their lives and whatever they're doing. All of these robots feel very differently about their situations, about their owners, about if they have owners. All of them have different abilities. And at the start of this very first book, I feel like you're set up to think that Murderbot is super unique. And yes, I mean, I would also argue that a large part of this series thematically is Murderbot realizing that it is in fact more unique than it thinks in terms of how it sees itself and the world, but also in all of the important ways. No. All of these other robot characters, even robot characters that you don't see for more than like 1 or 2 scenes, all of them are clearly just as sentient as Murderbot is, right? They're just dealt different sets of circumstances. And I really liked how the world played around with all of the different attitudes you see around that, both from robots and also from humans. And I think that the books are worth reading just for that, even if that is all that interests you, is just how this series kind of exists in the greater discourse cycle around robots and science fiction. This is a series that, even though the tone overall ends up being quite uplifting and almost cozy, not in a way that normal people define cozy, but in a way that I define as cozy. Even though I would say that this is an optimistic series, I think it still has a lot of very serious stuff to add to all of these conversations. So yeah, that's great. The themes are really interesting, but another reason why these books are worth reading is anybody who has ever felt different from other people in any kind of meaningful way. If you are neurodivergent, if you've ever felt like an outsider kind of looking in on something that everybody else seems to understand but you don't, or if you've ever felt directionless and unsure of like what your capital P purpose is supposed to be in the world. Say what you will about how the fact of these books being novellas kind of prevents a lot of development inside of the greater supporting cast of characters, but the emotional journey of its protagonist, of Murderbot, is just so well crafted, so well done. The growth that Murderbot experiences feels subtle until you look back at the start of the series and you really see how far it's come. And that's kind of what I mean when I'm describing this series as life affirming. That's kind of dramatic, but I'm in the mood to be dramatic right now, okay? Because ultimately, these are stories that are about kindness and compassion and figuring out who you are when there's nobody left around you to tell you who you're supposed to be, which is just about the most human of a journey that you could possibly expect a robot to embark upon. I loved these. I loved all 4 of them, especially the first one and the last one, but all of them are great. And also, they're bite-sized, so you don't really have an excuse. Next up, in second place, Real Ones might guess this top 2, but we have In Memoriam by Alice Wynne. This is another book that I've thought about so many times this year since I picked it up in like March or April or something. This was my front runner for most of this year. I think if I talk about it too much, I'm going to start crying, so I'm going to be careful. We're going to be careful. We're going to be chill and calm and collected, okay? This book follows these 2 17-year-old boys who are living in a boarding school inside of England. Their names are Henry Gaunt and Sidney Elwood, and history will say that they were roommates. They've been in love with each other for basically their entire teenage lives, but both of them absolutely refuse to even like imply anything about it to the other person for a whole slew of reasons. But also, in addition to that, they're both like way too in denial about their own feelings and also just their really strange friendship that they have, and that really just renders it impossible for them to acknowledge any of the obvious signs that the other person might feel the same way. So for years now, they have just existed in this godless, pathetic state of mutual pining and despair. And you might be thinking to yourself, oh, haha, boarding school antics. Oh boy, they're yearning. What a fun romance this is going to be. Joke's on you, because this book is about World War I. Something happens, and Henry is just, he's so torn up about it emotionally that he decides that he'd rather go to war than have a single, frank, honest, emotional conversation with his best friend. So he leaves campus, and he signs up for war, clearly not really knowing the gravity of his decision and what he's doing, because he's just a 17-year-old kid, right? But it immediately becomes clear to him what he's done and the position he's just put himself in when he finally makes it out to the front, which, of course, makes it all the worse when literally all of his friends, including his bestie Sidney, they all follow him to war, and most of them aren't in the same regiment as Henry is, so it's not like they're seeing each other every day. But yeah, no man left behind, or whatever, all of his friends join him on the front. So obviously things happen from there. This is not a happy story, because World War I was not a happy time for any of the soldiers who were fighting in it. This book is really, really heavy, basically from like page 50 all the way to the very end, but I'm a glutton for punishment. I prefer reading through tears, I guess. So yeah, I loved this book. When I read a story like this that covers real world trauma, things that have happened or do happen inside of the real world, and just these really heavy topics that I feel like almost always mandate gratuitous violence, I have said before and will always say that those stories need to be about something. I need the author to justify the emotional labor that I'm doing as a reader by saying something thematically that is meaningful, that is important, that not only requires, but is almost made all the more meaningful and important by what you're put through when you're reading the book. Some authors really just want to make their characters as traumatized as possible, seemingly just for the sake of it, and I've never fucked with that. I think it's pretty poor writing, and I feel like it displays just a flagrant lack of respect towards real trauma and the real people who have lived through it to demonstrate such a blasé attitude in what you throw at your characters and why. With all of that said, with my philosophy on display, hopefully you can trust me when I say that in my opinion, even though this was easily the saddest book that I read all year, and also the most dense with tragedy, like it's not just sad one time and then it's done. It's basically sad forever. I think that it's well worth it. I think that this book has a lot to say about war and about who gets to live and die and what that does to the people who survive. How you live through something like this and how you continue to live through it over and over again even after it's done. This book went in a direction that I really didn't expect with its ending, and I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. It makes the entire story up to that point all the more worthwhile with the questions it asks and the answers it gives. Also, in addition to all of these really powerful themes, like the reason that you're picking it up or whatever, I just adored Sidney and Henry as characters. I thought that they were so well drawn, so tangible inside of the narrative. The structure of this book is great. You're getting a bunch of flashbacks that are kind of interwoven into this story of initially Henry and then everybody else going to war. You're also reading these letters sometimes that all of the characters are sending to each other, which are just absolutely heartbreaking, just really fucked up, honestly. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of just a trust me moment. If you like sad books, if that's not going to kill your vibe, probably that also means you're willing to engage with some intense shit. Like, I'm assuming part A kind of passes you through the second prereq. If that's you, I don't think you need anything else. I think this book is just that good, and I don't want to say anything else. I don't think that would spoil the direction that this story ultimately takes. I mean, the eternal conundrum of the spoiler-free video, right?
Before we get to first place, in the same tradition that we began last year, I would just like to highlight a few honorable mentions of other things that weren't books that still sapped away my life force this year.
Okay, last up, in first place, we've made it. we've arrived. Real ones know that it's The Raven Scholar, alone at the top, my actual beloved this year. And it's kind of interesting because usually, almost always, my favorite books are the ones that I find to be the most emotionally affecting. They're the books I think are the most beautiful, the books that I connect to the most deeply, the books I find to be the most profound or whatever. Sorry to be annoying, I'm sorry, but it's kind of true. But The Raven Scholar is not here at the top of the list because it fits into that category. I don't think that I cried when I was reading this book. I mean, I wanted to cry when it was over after I thought for the first time about how long I would have to wait for the next book, but I don't love The Raven Scholar because it changed my whole life or really made me ponder things, or it just broke me into like 3 sharp shards of sadness or whatever. Not to say that it isn't still emotionally resonant sometimes, not to say that it doesn't have meaningful themes, meaningful things to say, because it does have those things. But overwhelmingly, this is at the top of this list because it is the most entertained and invested I have been in a book in maybe years. This was a level of locked in and punching the air that I did not think was available to me anymore. There are plenty of books that I will freely admit that I probably love because when I read them, they were insane. They were the first time I'd really experienced a well-crafted version of certain plots and emotions and tropes. But the truth of the matter is, I've read a lot more books since when I read a lot of the things I considered to be my favorite books from when I was younger. And I still, of course, love reading, but I feel like it's in a different way than when I was 15 or even when I was like 20, getting back into reading as an adult for the first time. I enjoy a lot of the books that I read, but I feel like it takes a lot more now for me to actually lose my mind over something because it feels fresh and unique and interesting. But here we are, man. I don't know. This just really, really did it for me. And you'll notice I haven't actually explained anything about the plot of this book yet, and that's kind of on purpose. I think personally that you should go into this book as blind as you could possibly be, with only the knowledge that this is a book about a realm where people from several different groups are competing to determine who will become the ruler of the realm at large. And it's supposed to be a relatively peaceful competition until somebody dies, and this death has to be investigated in the middle of everything happening. It's also an epic fantasy novel, but it's an epic fantasy with like a really, really strong subgenre in mystery. The author actually used to write historical crime novels, and I feel like it shows. You can definitely tell in the way that she crafted this story. There's also a romance subplot that was relatively minor, but it fed me. It fed me. I was very sated by it in a big way. And that's really all that you need to know, seriously. And if you hate it, if you pick this up and absolutely despise it, that's on me, okay? I'll take that. But I really think it's worth going into this as blind as possible. So that way this book just throttles you with its twists and turns in the same way that it throttled me. Almost every single person inside of my life that I have forced at gunpoint to read this book has loved it. It used to be literally everybody, but recently I had a friend not like it, which kind of broke my spirit, but it's fine. We're rocking like a 90% approval rate. That's not bad. You could join that number if you just call 1-800-DUDE just trust me. You almost certainly will not regret it. It's an all-timer in my opinion, and it's only book 1. I am actually feral at the bars of my enclosure, foaming at the mouth for book 2, which I know that we say these things to exaggerate sometimes, but to me, my emotional state, that's not an exaggeration. That's how I feel inside of my brain. I have no idea when it's coming out or if it will ever arrive, but I will go open to a bookstore whenever the day does come. This book is long. Trigger warning, it's long. I mean, to me, it was not long enough, but that's just because it is such a feat to make all of a 700-page book interesting. Do you know what you have to do to make me think that all of a 700-page book is interesting? Even books that I absolutely love, man, they'll have chapters, they'll have moments where I'm just a little bit bored. And I have a decent tolerance for boredom. That's why I can't DNF, honestly. It's also why I still love books that did occasionally bore me. But in my opinion, for a book to be this long and this interesting, for it to keep up such a breakneck pace of genuinely fascinating twists and turns for 700 pages, that is just, it's such an astounding feat. I would say that if you read this, it would make me, Lexi, aka Newly Nova, happy, but honestly, I feel like reading this is just a favor for yourself. If you want to practice self-care in the new year, aka in February when this video is coming out, prove it. Prove it. Prove it. Read this book. Prove it, or I think that you're a liar, probably, who doesn't care about self-care or pursuing happiness or like loving yourself or whatever, because if you did care about any of those things, it would already be done. It would already be wrapped and dusted in 5 stars on Goodreads. Boo consumerism unless it's buying this book. Boo long lines unless it's the hold line for this book at your local library. That is the only line that is worth standing in until the end of time. Every single person inside of that line is a valiant soldier pursuing a brighter future for both themselves and their families. I'm just saying, okay? I'm just saying. It's that good, in my opinion. In my opinion. I don't know what else to tell you. Read The Raven Scholar. Or else. Anyways, that's it. That's our best books video. Many people would have told you it would never be done. Many people would have told you that I was dead, and yet here I am. Here I am risen. On a slightly more serious note, thank you guys for your patience with this video. Not that it matters. I mean, it does matter, but like, I don't like oversharing on YouTube usually. I'm just doing this so that way you know I haven't just disappeared for no reason. Don't say sorry. Don't give me pity, okay? That's not what I'm looking for. But I have had like a pretty horrendous start to my 2026. Just a lot of like mental / physical sickness. Also some death happening around me that I took really hard, which kind of delayed things a little bit. Also just delayed my ability to be a human being. But I was gone for a while. This is, I think by like 2 weeks, maybe the longest break that has ever been in between videos, and it also like totally wasn't planned. And I just feel like it's kind of important for me to like very briefly paint the blurriest picture ever of the fact that it's not because I like hate you or hate making videos, because what matters is that I'm coping, I'm doing okay, and also I'm back in action. Thanks for being here. Seriously, thank you for still caring enough to click on a thumbnail with my face on it, even though I've been like completely AWOL and my end of year content is coming out in February. And I'm pretty bad at expressing with my voice how important it is to my life and my well-being that I have a community that it feels like I can make some kind of small positive impact on. So thank you for being one of those people. I hope that your new year has been okay. And if it hasn't been, I hope that greener pastures await us both. But anyways, that's it. Worst books soon. I'm just putting the hater allegations to rest with this one first, as I always do. Okay, I don't have anything else to say. Bye!